What would you do if your own sister demanded your life savings, your mother called you heartless, and both of them tried to destroy your career when you refused? How far would you go to protect yourself when the people you trusted most became the ones who hurt you the deepest? The perfect sister and the fall no one saw coming. I never thought the person who would come closest to destroying me would be my own sister. People imagine betrayal comes from outsiders, strangers, colleagues, distant acquaintances. But what happens when it comes from the very person you once trusted with your childhood secrets? What happens when family is the hand holding the knife? Anna had everything. At least, that's what everyone believed. She was radiant, adored, and married into a life that looked like something out of a glossy magazine. A handsome husband, a beautiful house, trips abroad, clothes that shimmered under the lights of parties. She was the golden daughter, the admired wife, the woman people whispered about with envy. And I, her younger sister, was the quiet shadow. I worked, saved, lived modestly, and made sacrifice after sacrifice for a dream so small and ordinary it seemed invisible to everyone else. The chance to one day have a place of my own. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. Every overtime shift, every meal skipped at restaurants, every holiday I never took, they all stacked into the one thing that kept me moving forward. I never boasted about it, but my family knew. They knew I had been carefully building something for myself. And perhaps that was my mistake, believing that because it was mine, it would be respected. But tell me this, when has envy ever respected boundaries? From the very beginning of her marriage, I could see the storm clouds. Derek, her husband, came from a family that was comfortable, not opulently rich, but secure. His parents helped with the wedding, helped with the down payment for their home, and in return asked for one condition: an agreement. A simple document that would protect the wealth he had before the marriage and ensure that if betrayal ever entered their relationship, it would have consequences. Anna raged against it. My mother called it insulting. I stayed silent because I knew it wasn't my fight. And in the end, Anna signed it anyway. She signed because the life she wanted was brighter than the doubts that flickered inside her. For 5 years, she basked in it. She never had to work, never had to save, never had to feel the weight of a bill pressing against her chest. Derek gave her a generous allowance, bought her a car, paid for everything she wanted. To outsiders, it was perfect. To me, it was fragile, like glass stretched thin, waiting for the right kind of pressure to make it shatter. And shatter it did. One night out, one careless decision, one reunion with a face from the past. She thought it would be a secret, but secrets rarely stay hidden, especially in a world where everyone knows everyone else. The truth found its way back to Derek, and he did not scream, did not plead. He simply told her to pack her things and leave. In that moment, the entire structure of her life collapsed. And that's when the spotlight turned toward me. Do you know what it feels like to be sitting in your mother's living room, listening as your sister, once untouchable, begs you to rescue her from the very mistake she made with her own hands? To watch your mother nod in solemn rhythm, as though betrayal could be rewritten into tragedy if only I was willing to bleed for it? They laid it out as if it were simple, as if it were obvious. Give her what I had built for myself, and she might claw back a future. Refuse, and I would forever be the cold, heartless sibling who abandoned her in her hour of need. $50,000. That's what they wanted. But let me ask you, how do you respond when everything you have sacrificed for is reduced to a lifeline for someone else's destruction? How do you keep calm when the people who should protect your dreams tell you that you are selfish for wanting to keep them? I sat there, staring at them, hearing their words, but barely believing them. My mother's voice grew sharp, accusing me of being ungrateful, cruel. My sister's tears turned to rage, claiming I had always been jealous, that I was celebrating her downfall. And all I could think was how easily years of love, laughter, and shared blood could be twisted into shackles. How quickly I had been transformed from daughter and sister into enemy. I told them no. Quietly. Firmly. Without apology. And in that instant, everything changed. My world shifted on its axis. And I realized I could never go back to the way things had been. That was the beginning. The night when silence broke, when the mask slipped, and when family revealed itself not as a sanctuary, but as the battlefield I never wanted to fight on. What happened next? What they did when they realized my no was final would unravel my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But that night was where the story truly began, with a choice that should have been simple, but became the line that divided everything before from everything after. So I'll ask you again, what would you do if your sister's mistake became your burden? If your mother's love turned into a weapon? And if the life you had spent years building suddenly became the prize they demanded you surrender? Would you give it up to keep the peace? Or would you dare, for the first time, to say no and accept the war that follows? Blood ties or blood money? I told them no, and I thought that would be the end of it. But what happens when no isn't accepted? What happens when your own blood decides that your refusal isn't a boundary, but an invitation to attack? That's when silence becomes dangerous, when family ties turn into chains, when every day begins to feel like a trial you never agreed to stand in. The first days after I refused were a blur of ringing phones and buzzing screens. Messages stacked one after another, each one a blow, each one trying to chip away at my resolve. My sister's words burned, selfish, jealous, cruel. My mother's accusations cut deeper, heartless, ungrateful, a failure to the family. And then came the aunts, voices I had once trusted, writing long letters drenched in disappointment. They told me money was just paper, that family was forever, that Anna had made a mistake, but I was making something worse, turning my back on her in her darkest hour. Isn't it curious how those who preach sacrifice the loudest are never the ones offering their own? None of them reached into their purses. None of them offered Anna even a fraction of what she demanded from me. Why was I the only one expected to bleed? At first, I ignored it. Silence seemed the safest weapon. But silence, it turns out, doesn't diffuse a fire. It feeds it. My sister knew how to play the victim, how to weave a story that made her the abandoned one, the tragic heroine cast aside by a cruel world. She took her grief online, posting cryptic laments about betrayal, about selfish family who hoarded money while she drowned. She didn't mention my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone who knew us understood. And suddenly, eyes shifted. People I had known for years looked at me differently, as though I carried some shame that couldn't be spoken aloud. Do you know what it feels like to be branded the villain in your own story? To watch lies take root and grow faster than truth ever could? It is a kind of suffocation, and yet I stayed silent, still hoping, perhaps foolishly, that the storm would pass. But storms rarely pass when people feed them. One night, my intercom buzzed, and there she was, my mother, uninvited, demanding entry. What choice did I have? Let her stand in the lobby, crying for the neighbors to see? I let her in, and immediately the performance began. She wept, painting pictures of Anna wasting away, too broken to eat, too fragile to survive without me. She said my refusal was driving my sister over the edge, that I was the one holding the blade at her throat. And then, as though to twist the knife, she leaned closer and whispered the words I will never forget. Your father would be ashamed of you. What does a daughter do when the dead are used against her? When the memory of the man who taught her responsibility is twisted into a curse? For a moment, I almost faltered. Guilt is a powerful thing. But then, in her next breath, she changed her face. The tears dried, the softness hardened, and she looked around my apartment as though cataloging my belongings. The television, the laptop, the furniture. She pointed, suggesting I could sell these things if I truly wanted to help. My possessions, my sacrifices, reduced to bargaining chips in her crusade. It was in that moment I realized this was not about Anna's survival. It was about control. My mother and sister had discovered a lever, and they would pull it until I broke. I asked her to leave. She refused, planting herself on my couch, saying she would not go until I agreed. Do you know the terror of having your own mother sit in your home like a trespasser, her love transformed into blackmail? I threatened to call security, and only then did she rise. But not before she leaned close, her face inches from mine, and hissed her prophecy. One day, when you are old and alone with your money, you will remember this night. You will regret it. She left with the slam of a door, but her words stayed. Not because I believed them, but because I knew they revealed her truth. This wasn't about love. It was about power. For a while, I thought I could endure. I blocked their numbers, filtered their emails, walled myself off. But walls only invite new tactics. My sister found my work email. Not satisfied with attacking me privately, she chose to expose me publicly, copying my boss in HR into her desperate plea. Her message was a fabrication, so carefully crafted it might have fooled anyone who hadn't lived the truth. She claimed I was the executor of my father's estate, that I was withholding family money, leaving her destitute. She even attached legal documents from her divorce as proof of her suffering. What do you do when your own sister tries to destroy not just your peace, but your livelihood? I sat in a conference room with my boss and HR, the email printed on the table, their eyes grave as they asked for an explanation. I showed them everything, the messages, the harassment, the patterns of manipulation. They believed me, yes, but the damage was done. My private agony was now part of my professional record, etched into files that would never disappear. And still, she did not stop. What drives someone to push this far? Is it desperation? Is it hatred? Or is it simply the belief that blood entitles you to everything another has? I no longer knew. What I did know was that this was no longer just a family conflict. It had become a siege, a campaign to break me down piece by piece, until the only way out was surrender, or war. I chose war. But war with family doesn't come with victory parades. It comes with exhaustion, with paranoia, with the creeping realization that people you once trusted are capable of turning your life into ash. And yet, even as I prepared my next step, a thought kept echoing in my head. If they were willing to humiliate me in front of strangers, to drag my dead father into the battle, to threaten my career, what would they do next? How far were they willing to go? The answer came soon, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. When my mother said, "Your father would be ashamed." It is strange how words can wound more deeply than fists. I can still hear my mother's voice that night, trembling at first, then sharpening into something jagged and cold. Your father would be ashamed of you. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew my father's absence was the rawest scar I carried, and she pressed down with all her weight. In that single moment, I understood that this was no longer about money, nor even about my sister's downfall. It was about power, dominance, and the willingness to turn even the memory of the dead into a weapon. What do you do when the people who raised you begin to resemble strangers? How do you defend yourself when the attacks aren't thrown punches but poisoned words, when every conversation feels like a trap designed to shatter your resolve? A warm welcome to you all from Dran, where stories like this cut deep because they come wrapped in family ties, and where the line between love and betrayal is so thin you can barely breathe across it. I wish I could say the cruelty stopped there, but cruelty is rarely satisfied with one blow. It circles, it waits, it grows bolder each time it senses hesitation. My sister's campaign against me evolved in ways I could never have predicted. She began writing me emails not just filled with accusations, but with a chilling mixture of pleading and threats. One line would beg me to remember the bond of childhood. The next would spit venom, calling me a thief, a traitor, an enemy. And then the twists came, each one sharper than the last. One morning, I arrived at work to find my mother sitting in the lobby, waiting. She had tracked me down, discovered the company I worked for, and decided to confront me in the one place I believed was untouchable. She didn't whisper her grief. She didn't ask for privacy. She cried loudly, dramatically, proclaiming to the receptionist and anyone within earshot that her daughter was suffering, abandoned, betrayed by her own sister. Imagine standing there, colleagues passing by, your own mother branding you as cruel and heartless in the place where you had built your career. Would you feel anger first? Or shame? Would you defend yourself or shrink under the weight of eyes watching, silently judging? I managed to push her outside to end the scene, but humiliation lingered like smoke. That day, my boss called me into his office, not with anger, but with the kind of grave concern that feels almost worse. I explained everything, showed him the trail of harassment, the manipulation, the relentless demands. He listened, he nodded, he understood, but the damage was already written into my professional record. What does it cost a person to have their family tear into their career? Not just dignity, but reputation, security, the foundation of everything you've worked for. And just when I thought it couldn't escalate further, my sister crossed another line. She sent an email not only to me, but also to my boss and HR. In it, she accused me of financial abuse, claiming I had stolen from her, that I had hidden family funds, that I was hoarding money meant to be shared. Lies, each one deliberate, designed to sound official, believable. She even attached documents from her divorce to make her case appear legitimate. Is there anything more suffocating than watching your own blood manufacture a story that paints you as the villain, not just to friends and relatives, but to the very people who hold your livelihood in their hands? I sat in a conference room with the printed email before me, flanked by my boss and an HR representative, their eyes fixed on me with a seriousness that made my skin crawl. I had no choice but to expose everything, to open the vault of private torment and spill it across the table. The texts, the threats, the manipulation, the truth of Anna's betrayal. They believed me. Yes. They told me the accusations would not stain my job. But how do you wash away something once it's been spoken aloud? How do you erase the suspicion that lingers, even when people know the facts? That night, rage mingled with fear in me like oil and fire. I realized then that this was not merely harassment. This was war. My sister was not trying to win my help anymore. She was trying to ruin me, to strip me of my standing, to punish me for refusing to play her game. And yet, the most terrifying question echoed louder than all the others. If she was willing to lie to my employer, to humiliate me in public, to weaponize my dead father's memory, what line was left? What boundary had she not already crossed? I thought I had seen the worst of them. I thought words, lies, and humiliation were the limits of their arsenal. But I was wrong. Because cruelty, once it tastes blood, never stops where you think it will. It pushes further, bolder, more reckless. And when it finally broke into violence, it wasn't in some private corner, but under the glaring lights of a wedding hall, with everyone watching. That was where everything I feared, and everything I still didn't know to fear, collided in one shattering moment. But that, my friends, is another part of the story. The red wine and the claws. I almost didn't go to that wedding. I told myself it would be safer to stay home, to avoid the collision that felt inevitable. But then I thought about my cousin, the one person in our family who had always treated me with kindness. Could I really let Anna and my mother's chaos rob me of celebrating her day? I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, we could all behave for a few hours. That hope, fragile and trembling, was what pushed me through the doors of that reception hall. At first, it seemed as though my gamble had worked. I stayed at my table, surrounded by friends who knew enough of my story to shield me with their presence. Across the room, I saw Anna and my mother, their eyes on me, but their bodies anchored to their corner. For an hour, I let myself believe it might pass without incident. I sipped water, laughed at small jokes, and allowed my shoulders to loosen for the first time in weeks. But peace is a dangerous illusion when it comes from people who thrive on war. When the band went quiet, when the room hushed for a brief moment, that's when Anna chose to strike. She walked toward me, her steps deliberate, her face set like stone. In her hand was a glass of red wine, and even before she spoke, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. She stopped at my table, her eyes boring into mine. "Must be nice," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the music still echoing faintly in the room. "Buying an apartment while I'm being thrown out of Mom's house. You've always had it easy, haven't you? Cold, heartless, just like Dad." The mention of my father hit me like a slap. It was the same line my mother had used, a weapon polished and sharpened between them. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and told her quietly that this was not the time, not the place. I turned to leave, but then it happened. The moment that burned itself into my skin and memory. The wine arced through the air and exploded against my dress, staining it with a crimson bloom. Gasps rippled across the hall. I froze, the cold liquid seeping into fabric, into flesh, as if the humiliation itself were soaking into me. For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then Anna lunged. Her hands were claws, raking at my arms, reaching for my face. While she screamed words I barely heard over the pounding in my ears. Guests shouted, chairs toppled, groomsmen rushed forward to pull her away. My mother appeared, but not to restrain her. Instead, she pointed at me, accusing, as though I had provoked the violence, as though I had orchestrated the entire scene just to ruin Anna's life. Imagine standing there, wine dripping from your ruined dress, scratches blooming red across your arms, your own mother screaming blame at you, while your sister fights like a wild animal to tear you apart. Imagine the bride, my cousin, in tears, her wedding collapsing into chaos not because of strangers, but because of her own family. What would you have done? Would you have fought back? Would you have screamed until your voice broke? Or would you, like me, stand there trembling, fury and sorrow twisting together until you could barely tell them apart? That night, something inside me shifted. Until then, I had believed there might still be a thread, however frayed, that tied us together. But watching Anna dragged out by security, watching my mother spit venom at me as she followed, I knew that thread had snapped for good. Blood ties had become shackles, and at last I had broken free. Not by choice, but by necessity. If you've stayed with me through this story, if the weight of it has pulled you in, I want to ask something simple. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. It may seem like a small action, but for us, it's a huge encouragement that fuels our passion to bring you even more captivating real-life stories. The next morning, I traced the scratches on my skin, tiny lines that told the truth of what had happened. And then, I did something I never thought I would do. I went to the police. I gave them my statement, listed the witnesses, handed over the names of security guards who had dragged my sister away. Filing that report felt like signing away the last possibility of reconciliation, but also like breathing for the first time in months. Because this was no longer a family quarrel. It was an assault. And if my own sister was willing to attack me in public, if my own mother was willing to defend it, then I had to face the truth I had avoided for too long. I was not safe. So I began the process of securing a restraining order, building my case with every text, every email, every scar. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but also the clearest. There was no family left to save, only myself. And yet, even as I signed the papers and prepared for what came next, I couldn't help but ask, how did it come to this? How does a family collapse so completely that one sister calls the police on another? That a mother becomes an enemy rather than a protector? Was this always written into our story, waiting for the moment to reveal itself? These are the questions that echo in me still. And they are the questions that drive me to share this with you now, to remind you that blood is not always love. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying this story with me. And if you haven't already, maybe I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling stories that matter, stories that might just make someone out there feel a little less alone. My own apartment without a family. The first night I slept in my own apartment, I lay on the floor because the furniture hadn't yet arrived. The room was bare, the air too quiet, but I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time, no one could walk in uninvited. No one could demand, accuse, or manipulate. The walls were mine. The silence was mine. And still lying there, I wept. Not because I regretted my decision, but because freedom often tastes bittersweet. People imagine that when you cut ties with toxic family, you feel only relief. They don't tell you about the ache that follows, the strange emptiness where love should have been. I had always assumed, even in anger, that blood would bind us forever. But now I know. Blood is not enough. Love has to be chosen, nurtured, protected. And if it isn't, if it turns into entitlement and cruelty, then sometimes the only way to survive is to walk away. When the restraining order came through, the judge's voice was steady, almost mechanical, as he listed the conditions. My mother and sister were legally bound to stay away from me, from my home, from my work. A piece of paper, yes. But more than that, a shield. I held it in my hands, and for the first time I felt the scales begin to balance. Justice doesn't erase pain, but it draws a line. It tells you, you are not crazy, you are not overreacting, you are not alone. Meanwhile, life moved on without them. My cousin's wedding, though marred by chaos, became the turning point that opened the eyes of our wider family. The aunts who once lectured me into silence grew quiet. Friends who had doubted me finally understood. My mother and sister, once loud and commanding, now lived in the shadow of their own choices. Isolated, dependent, bitter. And me? I kept moving. I signed the papers for my apartment, painted the walls, planted a small fern by the window. Simple things, but each one felt like a victory reclaimed. Yet there are nights when the memories return. I think of my sister as a child, before jealousy hardened her, before entitlement became her language. I think of my mother, who once tucked me into bed, who once told me I was strong. And I wonder, was there ever a version of this story where we might have ended differently? Could kindness have saved us if it had come sooner? But those are questions without answers, and I've learned not to live inside them. Instead, I carry what I know now. That love without respect is not love. That sacrifice without choice is not virtue. That boundaries are not betrayals. They are lifelines. I do not pretend that my story is rare. Many listening to this right now may feel the same weight pressing on their chest, may recognize the same patterns of manipulation, guilt, and control. Maybe you too have been told that family is forever, that money is just paper, that your refusal makes you cruel. Maybe you've lain awake at night wondering if you're the problem, if you're heartless for wanting to keep what you've earned, for wanting peace. Hear me clearly. You are not heartless. You are not selfish. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. Sometimes choosing yourself is survival. When I stand now in the doorway of my small apartment, keys in hand, I remind myself of everything it took to get here. 10 years of saving, endless nights of sacrifice, and then the hardest part of all, the courage to say no and to mean it. I look around the quiet rooms and I see not emptiness, but space. Space for safety, space for growth, space to build a future not dictated by the mistakes of others. It still hurts, yes. Loss always does. But healing doesn't begin with forgetting. It begins with facing the truth and refusing to let it consume you. My mother and sister may never change, and reconciliation may never come, but I have made peace with that. Because the life I have now, however modest, is finally mine. And so, if there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Do not let guilt trap you in chains you were never meant to wear. Do not confuse sacrifice with love, or control with loyalty. If your heart is telling you to draw a line, to protect your future, to claim your own hard-earned peace, listen to it. That voice is not selfish. That voice is sacred. My journey ended not with triumph or tragedy, but with something quieter, steadier, freedom. And though it came at the cost of family, it also came with the promise that I could finally live without fear. That is the ending I chose. That is the ending I hope you remember. And maybe, if you are listening now and carrying your own burden, you will find the strength to choose yours. When I look back on everything that has happened, the story feels both unbearably heavy and strangely clarifying. What began as a single refusal to hand over my savings unfolded into a relentless storm that tested every boundary, every ounce of resilience I had. I was branded selfish, humiliated in front of colleagues, slandered in messages, and attacked in public. Yet in that chaos, I discovered something I'd never truly believed before, that my worth is not defined by how much I give, but by how firmly I stand for myself. It is tempting to see family as unbreakable, as a bond that should endure all storms. And yes, family can be a source of strength, comfort, and unconditional love. But when loyalty becomes a weapon, when guilt is twisted into chains, then family is no longer a sanctuary. It becomes a battlefield. Walking away from that battlefield was the hardest decision I ever made, but it was also the most necessary. Because peace is not given, it is claimed. And sometimes, claiming it means breaking ties with the very people who taught you what love was supposed to mean. The truth is, we often underestimate the cost of silence. For years, I stayed quiet, believing that keeping the peace was worth my own sacrifices. But silence did not protect me. It only emboldened those who thought they could take more. It wasn't until I finally spoke with my actions, no more, not again, that I began to reclaim my life. And this is the lesson I want to share with you. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are acts of self-respect. Saying no is not betrayal. It is the most honest form of self-preservation. If someone cannot honor your limits, they do not honor you. And no amount of shared blood or history should force you to surrender the future you have worked so hard to build. Think about your own life. Are there places where you are sacrificing too much, where your silence is being mistaken for consent? Are you carrying burdens that are not yours to carry, simply because you feel you have no choice? Ask yourself whether your loyalty is rooted in love or in fear. Then ask yourself what it would mean to choose differently. If you remember only one thing, let it be this: you deserve peace, you deserve freedom, and you deserve to keep what you have built without apology. We invite you to join the Dran community, where stories like this are shared to inspire, to provoke thought, and to remind you that you are not alone in your struggles. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to continue bringing you more powerful, thought-provoking stories in the videos to come.